Okay. All right. I can see Rhett and Gavin. Can you guys see the screen? It says IOC 100. Good, thank you. All right, so this is chapter 10, persuasive methods. And I'm sorry, as you notice here, it is death by PowerPoint. I've got like 20 million slides. So hang with me, just know that there's a lot of content to cover in this chapter. And so it's literally, as I'm looking at here, 28 slides, including this one. So, okay, so how do we define it? That it's defined by the book as it's intended to influence choice. Is what persuasion is, as opposed to informative, right? That informative is not intended to influence choice. Informative is intended to inform, to give you more knowledge or something. But here we are, it's about influencing the choices. And so apart from anything else, there's choice. That's implied here, right? Is that it's this or that. And your goal here is to nudge, to push, to influence the audience to choose the way you want them to choose. A couple of things it's not. It is not just offering a bunch of info and letting the audience make up their minds. That's informative. I sometimes see this when students do their persuasive speech, is that they present, information on both sides, and then at the end of the speech, when they're supposed to be closing the deal, they say, I've given you all the information, you make up your mind. No. That is intending to be informative. I've given you all the information, but I am not trying to influence your choice. That's not. When you get to your persuasive speech, you should be deliberately trying to influence their choice. You're going to say, this is the way I'm going to go. This is the way you should go. And the other way isn't as good. And I mean, that's what you got to do with persuasion. Not in your next speech. In your next speech, you are just trying to keep things as even-handed as possible, giving lots of information. You make up your own mind, or here's a lot of information, and in my next speech, I'm going to tell you which way to lean. That might be a way of thinking about how do you wrap up this next speech, that you're not trying to close the deal, offering information, and I'll really tell you what's up. Another thing it's not trickery, it's not coercion, it's not, tricking somebody is like lying to them or something, right? And that's not what you're doing. That would influence their choice, but that's not what we do. And I'll talk more about that. And it's not coercion, it's not forcing, right? If you take somebody and you bend their arm behind their back and you say, do this, that's coercion. You hold a gun to their head. That's not what persuasion is. Persuasion and coercion are different. So that one of the ways to think about it is that looking at, there are a number of options, but that option isn't as good, and that option isn't as good, and that option isn't as good, and oh look, there's only one option left as the least bad or the best or something like that, right? So there's ways of dealing with that. How do we do that? Well, you're going to construct logical arguments. You're going to say, therefore this, right? These things are true, and therefore it leads to this thing being true. That logic is a useful thing to do. There are emotional and ethical appeals. As you are trying to influence people, it's okay to tug at their emotion. It's okay to remind them of right and wrong. That's fine, and that's appropriate, that you include those kinds of appeals. Okay. So there are a couple different kinds of persuasive speeches that a person might make, a couple different kinds of persuasive arguments that you might make. And so it might be useful for you to be thinking about this. And it goes way back to one of those first days of our class. You'll recognize some of these things. So one of the things you might be persuading is just a point of fact. Does a harm exist? Is this real or is not? I mean, in a world where we've got all kinds of argument over what is, alternative facts or fake news, is this thing real? I think one of the ways we're seeing this argument playing out right now has to do with voter fraud, and that basically the conservative, the CPAC conference that just happened of the conservative folks getting together in Florida talked a lot about voter fraud and this concern about voter fraud. Well, there's a real question about, is there evidence for this? And that question is not being raised at the CPAC. They just skip right over, is there actual voter fraud happening in such a way that it could be a problem? So a person could go in and say, make the argument, a persuasive argument, that voter fraud, while it's real, doesn't actually do any harm. Our elections aren't being harmed by the handful, literal handful of fraudulent votes that are being cast. All right, value is another proposition, right? Is this right or wrong? What is the value of this thing? So we see this kind of argument happening with education. We sometimes see it with immigration, those kinds of things, right? We saw this with putting children in cages, right? Under all the administrations, as far as we know, going back to the Obama administration. It certainly got pointed at during the Trump administration, but I think, families and children are still being detained at the border. It's not like this problem has just gone away with the Biden administration. And the question is, what is the value of an immigrant child? Does putting them in cages solve the problem, in fact, of illegal immigration? And is it something that is so wrong we should find another solution? That would be a kind of a value persuasive argument you could make. Another kind of a persuasive argument is scope, right? How big is it? Is this something that is pervasive and big enough to be attended to by political policy, or is it just not that big a deal? So I think one of the ways we might see this is in marijuana legalization. How big is the problem of recreational marijuana? Is it a big problem? Or is it just, is it, where there are problems, is it going to be solved best by individual rather than group action? And then policy persuasions. What actual kind of governmental action is required? What is the policy we should have? All right, so those are a couple different kinds. It just might be useful for you as you're looking down into your final speech and thinking about that. Which of these are you focusing on? And it's best to try to really focus in. Don't try to say, well, I'm talking about gun control and I'm going to cover all 4 of these areas. It's probably too much for one speech. So really thinking about how do you focus in a limited way. In all cases, with your persuasive speeches, in all cases, you should take a policy attack. I do want to hear what is the governmental policy that we should employ. You might also include some of these others, but mainly you're going to be focused on policy. Okay, Toulmin. So there was this communications philosopher. His name is Toulmin, and he basically he broke down the notion of what is an argument and said it has these couple of parts. And if we think about these parts, we can analyze and understand an argument. And so Toulmin is a very famous person in the philosophy of communication and argument, and it's a name you should know as well as these parts. So I'm going to go over these things, and then I think there's a little video I've got here that will help to explain Toulmin better than I can. So arguments have 3 parts. First is the claim. This is the term that they use in Toulmin, is the claim, and this is the conclusion. This is the thing that you want your audience to go, okay, that we should have more gun control. We should have less gun control. Those are both examples of claims that at the end of the day, on an argument of there's 2 different ways to go, it should be A, not B, okay? So that's the claim is that central thing. Evidence is out there, then supports for the claim. These are the reasons why this support should be made. And then the third part is the warrant. And the warrant is the hardest to sort of wrap your head around. And just know that. So the warrant connects the evidence that you provide with the claim that you provide. So if I make the claim, you should all give me $20 because, and here's the evidence, the sky is blue. All of you would go, what? What? I should give you $20 because the sky is blue? So I've given you a really defective argument. the warrant is obviously missing there, right? But if I said to somebody, you should give me respect because I have my PhD, most people would go, yeah, okay. I see the warrant between there, right? That offering somebody respect when they have an advanced degree makes sense. This is the kind of thing I've been taught. They've earned it, and we recognize it. Now, warrants are almost never stated explicitly or unpacked explicitly. That's the other tricky part about them. And most of the time when you encounter an argument, you're going to hear the claim and you're going to hear the evidence and you're going to kind of go, okay, that makes sense, right? To some degree, but sometimes not. And so the way to do this, so I've got a couple of points. I've been talking about this. It's usually, yep, it's just unstated. But here, this is the thing to think about, is that if you hear an argument and you go, what? You have that kind of a, huh? Response, it's probably the warrant. And so thinking about looking at that. So it's like, yeah, I hear what you want, and I'm hearing you're saying this is the evidence, but I don't see the connection. And so that would be a response that you might make to somebody who is asking you to follow their line of thinking. If you go, what? Sometimes warrants need backing, right? There's further evidence. Why is it that when the sky is blue, I should give you $20? And then I explain that, well, I'm the one who makes the sky blue. And then you'd be like, oh, okay. Then you accept it, right? So sometimes you might encounter a warrant, you go, what? And then you hear more about it, you go, okay, I can get my head around that. Okay, so here's a short video next about Toulmin that hopefully can explain it a little bit better than I can. It's about a 3-minute video. Somebody will chime in if.
The Toulmin method is a tool for analyzing and crafting arguments developed by the philosopher Stephen Toulmin. To help you see all the benefits of this method, here's the Toulmin Toolman to show you how it works. Each of the tools on his tool belt is essential for developing a strong argument. Claim, grounds, warrant, backing, qualifier, and rebuttal. Let's start with the primary tool, the claim. This is the assertion or thesis that the writer proposes, serving as the main expression of the argument. An example of a claim would be, dogs are the greatest pets. While the justification is not yet included, you can clearly see the writer's viewpoint that will direct the argument. To grant this argument some validity, the Toulmin Toolman will use his next tool, the grounds, which serve as the argument's foundation, justifying the main viewpoint of the argument. For example, a great pet is intelligent, obedient, and loving. This statement establishes the qualities that would describe a great pet. However, it is not yet directly connected to the claim concerning dogs. This is where the warrant comes in. This tool serves as the connective tissue between the claim and the grounds, whether stated directly or simply implied. For example, to link back to the claim of dogs as the greatest pets, we can add, dogs are perceptive, easily trained, and one of the most affectionate animals towards humans. Now we have linked our claim about dogs to the grounds on what makes a great pet. Any additional evidence used to support the claim is considered the backing. For example, these traits are why dogs are the most widely used service animals. While this statement may not be enough justification on its own, it serves well in conjunction with the warrant and grounds. Few claims are true in all circumstances. A qualifier allows for special cases and helps establish the author as reasonable and credible. In this argument, the grounds can be edited with a qualifier to allow for cases in which some dogs don't match the criteria of the greatest pet as stated in the claim. Dogs are typically perceptive, easily trained, etc. The qualifier typically adds credibility to the argument as it acknowledges special cases contrary to the argument's claim. Lastly, it serves well to acknowledge another side of the argument to establish the writer as unbiased and open-minded. An acknowledgement in the form of a rebuttal persuades readers who disagree with the claim to follow suit and accept an unbiased perspective. Here, the writer can bolster their claim of dogs as the greatest pets and acknowledge the competition. For example, while some may argue cats can also be affectionate and obedient, they are still more difficult to train than dogs. Now we have acknowledged that dogs are not the only animals that can be good pets without contradicting our earlier claim that dogs are the greatest pets. As you can see, we have now constructed a strong, unbiased, and complete argument that would make even the most adamant cat owners consider the quality of dogs. But, to be fair, who would ever dispute man's best friend? For more information on persuasive writing or other writing techniques, visit our website at writingcenter.tamu.edu.
Okay, now the question is, can I figure out, there we go, how to go on. So before I move on to this next thing about logical reasoning and how it works, just note that that Toulmin thing showed many more parts, right, than I did. The most fundamental parts are still there, right? The claim and the warrant and the grounds, the evidence, right? Those are the three parts. The other parts are useful too. It's complicated, I think, and Toulmin is the kind of a rhetorical analysis tool that if you use it a lot, it sort of gets stuck in your head and it helps a lot. But it's hard to use it a lot. So I think in the future, you might encounter this again if you take some more communication studies classes and things like that, maybe some more advanced argumentation kinds of classes, you're certainly going to encounter Toulmin again. So it's useful to have at least the fundamental concepts there. The notion is you can take an argument, a whole argument, and break it apart. And when you do that and you notice the parts, then sometimes you can find the weaknesses in those parts. So when you encounter an argument that is for the other side of whatever it is you're arguing, right? Whatever it is you're proposing, you need to be encountering the other side. Really look at and analyze their arguments. Where is it weak? Is it weak in its grounds, in its evidence? Does it not really have evidence? Is it weak in its warrant that there is evidence out there that we all agree on, but it doesn't connect back to the thing that's being argued for? Those kinds of things are what I would hope you would start to be able to do on your specific things, looking at opposing arguments and trying to test them and see where they are weak. If you can find weakness, then you can really go after that argument. Let me give you a concrete example. I had a student years ago who did a speech that tried to persuade us that the world is only 6,000 years old, which some biblical literalists will employ, right? They go back and they look at the Bible and they count all the begats and say, this is about how old the world should be. And then they go out and they look for evidence to support that. And so she had evidence that included the amount of silt in the Mississippi Delta that shows that the world is only 6,000 years old, because if it was older than 6,000 years, there would be different amounts of silt. She talked about the amount of dust they found on the moon, things like that. And so there's no disputing the amount of silt in the Mississippi Delta or the amount of dust they found. I'm not arguing against that, but I would argue against the warrant, right? The conclusion that she drew back to, therefore the world is only 6,000 years old, falls apart. That connective tissue isn't there because there are reasonable scientific explanations why the amount of silt in the Mississippi Delta is what it is, why the amount of dust on the moon is what it is, that she had ignored. So, right, the grounds were, I'm not arguing that those, right, it was in the warrant that those things didn't connect back to her initial claim, her initial claim. Okay, moving on. So logical reasoning. So when you're using logic as you're trying to move your speech along and convince people to do things, it'll do that, right? Logical reasoning does convince people. It's possible to do this. So one of the ways to do this is reasoning by analogy. Something is like something else. It helps to explain things. It helps to open people's mind up, but it's not really proof, right? Just because a bus is the same size as a Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't mean that Tyrannosaurus Rexes are like buses in any other way but size. So, analogies can be useful. They can help frame things, but they're not necessarily going to convince us of things. Causal reasoning is about cause to effect, right? That something happened to lead to something else. Beware, as we'll get to this when I'm looking at some logical fallacies, correlation does not equal causation. This is a phrase that you should just learn and be ready to employ. When somebody says these two things happened, you should have that in your hip pocket just to put back at them, right? But yeah, both of these things happened, but it doesn't mean that one caused the other. So here's some ways to test the reasoning. Is the cause and effect relationship consistent? Every time A happens, does B also happen? If not, then that's a breakdown of the causation. Does cause always precede the effect? When do things happen? Check that out, because sometimes it's like, whoa, wait a second, the effect happened first. So looking for that. Causality almost always is a time-based thing. And then, are there other factors at play? Yes, thing A happened, and yes, thing B happened. Were other things happening to cause that? Yeah. What are the other potential causes? And then, is the thing that you're pointing at or they're pointing at the most important thing? Or is there some other bigger cause? Okay, so those are a couple of ways to be thinking about causal reasoning, cause and effect. Well, just like logic, you can also use fear to convince people to agree with you, to persuade them. It's pretty simple. So you tell the audience that something bad is likely to happen. And you tell them that your solution is the thing that's going to fix the problem. Whew, you've convinced them. So as you note, there's all kinds of problems with this, and you should have your radar really strong anytime you're hearing somebody using fear appeals. That your spidey sense should start tingling of, wait a second, you're trying to scare me. And when I'm scared, I'm less likely to be thinking about all the alternatives. I'm less likely to be cool and logical in my head when I'm hot in my heart and scared. So watch out when people are trying to scare you about anything. Stay back, stay cool. Now, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. Sometimes you should be afraid, but just be cool, right, in your head. So a couple things here about this. So yeah, fear appeals are highly prone to unethical exaggeration. And some of the things to then test this as you encounter it, right, is it really going to happen? Will that something bad actually happen? So about immigration, right? There are all kinds of fear appeals we heard in the previous the Clinton-Trump election about immigration and the fear of hordes of people crossing the border and invading America. Will it actually happen? It didn't. And in fact, under Obama's looser policies, it didn't. So that's one of those ways of thinking about that, right? Second thing is it going to be as bad as it seems, right? Sometimes it's like whoever's making the fear appeal is going to make it seem like it's a zombie apocalypse. Well, maybe it's just a bee sting. If it's just a bee sting, then maybe it's not as bad as you're saying, and maybe your solution is less needed. Another thing to think about is that solution actually going to fix the problem? So you've suggested a problem that we should be scared about. Is this actually going to fix it? Something to think about. And then finally, okay, so you've said this bad thing's going to happen, and I believe it's actually going to happen, and I believe it is as bad as you say. It's going to be really bad. And maybe your solution is actually going to fix the problem. But is the solution worse than the problem? We hear this one often from some people who are really advocates for gun ownership. is that, they say if you restrict gun ownership in order to cut down on crazy people having guns and school shootings and things like that, the solution that you're proposing to restrict gun ownership is worse than the problem. That because if you restrict gun ownership, we're going to have no protection against a tyrannical government. So that would be worse. So we're going to live with, children being shot because we are afraid that the solution is worse than the problem. That's a real world example. Okay, so fear appeals are very convincing and they're very powerful. And one of the really big bummers out there is that it turns out that evidence and logic don't work as well as fear. Fear is really persuasive. People are really easily pulled. And we see this, right? Whereas some of these meme things about sheeple and stuff like that, right? If you are a scared sheep, you're going to be led around by the nose. And then that is legitimate, right? We should not be scared sheep, and we shouldn't just be led around by the nose. We should be following logic and reasoning. But the problem is that there are several problems here. That people who don't really have good critical thinking skills can't identify bad arguments. So that's part of what I'm trying to do today is I'm going to outline some ways that arguments are bad. But this should be something you are working on with this, your topic in your speech, is looking for illogical arguments and starting to analyze and unpack them. Turns out that if somebody says something like, well, logically, blah, 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 or to conclude, blah, 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 people think they're using logic. So it's important to have your spidey sense strong and test, is it really logical, the thing that they're saying is logical? Because just them saying it can persuade some people, but not you. Turns out that if you've got lots of junk evidence, that can be very persuasive. If the other side has less evidence, it's higher quality, that's discounted. So somehow just tons and tons and tons of BS can be very persuasive for some people. So watch for that. Just because somebody's spouting a lot doesn't mean that they're right. One of the other bummers is that if you're speaking to the choir, if you're talking to an audience that already agrees with you, you don't need to provide any evidence. And they will think you have. If they are polled later and they're asked, you believe this? Yes. This person said such and such? Yes. Did they provide you with evidence? Yes. Even if they didn't provide any evidence, the audience will think they have. Turns out that if you've had an experience personally, that's more persuasive for you as a person than experts and statistics. So if you think about that there's oftentimes when you see a graph or a scatter chart, right, there's all these dots for these examples, and there's always a couple of outliers, these dots that are way out there. Well, it turns out that if you are one of those outliers, that personal experience is going to be convincing for you. It's really hard for people to go, okay, I guess my experience was unusual. It's really hard for people to do that. Okay, so yes, fear tactics work, but of course, doing these things intentionally is unethical, right? Offering illogical arguments is unethical. Just peppering your speech with logical sounding words is unethical. Pumping out lots of poor quality BS is unethical. Is it unethical to speak to your audience, to your own audience? No, but if the evidence is against you, it is. It is unethical. You've got to find the evidence and follow it and maybe change your mind and then use your power to change other people's minds. And just watch out for your own personal experiences. They may not be the norm. You can't let them push you around. Okay, so these things are unethical. We shun unethical people, and that's why you should use evidence and logic, not fear. Okay, so what are the ethical persuasive tools? Winterstein, now you've told us all the things not to do. So what can we do? So one of those things is to make your evidence obvious, right? Gather the evidence and share it. Make it as clean and clear and obvious as possible. That's ethical. That's fine. You don't have to be coy about it. If this is the truth, put it out there. The other parts of this, where did you get it from? What is the credibility of your source? How strong is that source? You can make that obvious to the audience. That's ethical as well. This comes from a legitimate scientific journal. This is from Johns Hopkins University, right? This is from a legitimate news source. Okay, make that obvious. That's ethical. So it turns out that one of the things you need to do is when you're citing somebody, an authority like Dr. Fauci, it's not enough to just sort of go, well, Dr. Fauci said that vaccines are going to be good for the population, right? You have to explain why they're an authority. Dr. Fauci, the foremost authority on infectious disease in our country, says blah, 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 blah. So if you don't explain why they're an authority, you just sort of name drop and move on, it could be less persuasive for audience. So include that component. Why is the authority an authority? And if it turns out as you dig into this, it's like, oh, I found this great bit of evidence and here's this authority. And then you dig in, you go, oh, this is just the MyPillow guy. Then it's not an authority and you shouldn't cite them. Maybe change your mind. Cite your source, why they're authority. Okay, so here's part of the order of operations on this. It's best to put out your evidence, then the source, and then why they're the authority. That's the order you want to do this in. It's a little tricky, and as you're crafting your speeches, you're just going to write stuff, or you're just going to put it out there. Come back to this, that you want the evidence, what is true, where did you get it from, and why they're the authority, and provide the information in that order. If you have firsthand experiences, include them. That is ethical. If it's an outlier, it's not. It's not ethical if it's an outlier. But if you have authoritative sources and they say, this is the norm, this is what happens, and you're like, and this happened to me, or it happened to my mom, that's okay, including those personal stories. Yeah, narrative and statistical evidence is ethical. So give us the data, give us the stats, and tell us a story. A story from somebody who's not an outlier is going to make it powerful. That's ethical. You can do that. Finally, you're going to want to present new information and arguments. So look for, is your information dated and old? What is the newest thing out there? That is stronger and something you should be doing. Okay, so one of the things that you have to do is attend to both sides of the argument. This is partly just paying attention to your audience. All of you are dealing with contentious issues where people are divided, our society is divided, and you have to attend to the other side of the argument. One of the reasons I have for this is that I think all too often we get trapped into echo chambers, and we only hear the stuff that we're used to hearing. We only hear the stuff we already agree with, and it's just really easy to fall into that trap. So I want you to be really intentional about whatever topics you've chosen. You've chosen them for a reason. You're feeling stuff for a reason. And I want you to really authentically dig into the other side, open to the notion that maybe you're wrong. So that's kind of beyond somewhat of the scope of this class, but I think just as being a good citizen, it's important to be open and listening, even on things you think you know the answer to. You stop, you just hit the pause button on what you have, and you open yourself to the other arguments and really look at them and not just dismiss them out of hand. Because the reality is that good, smart people think differently than you do, and they do it for good reasons. They're not sheeple. They're just like you, but they've come to different conclusions. So don't dismiss them. Engage them as human beings who are thinking. So other side has excellent ideas. Sure, they may not be as good as your ideas. They may have some problems with them, but they are excellent ideas nonetheless. Really embrace that idea as you're going in. You want to assume that your audience knows something about your topic. And so if you have an audience that knows something about the topic, but they're kind of on the fence, or they are persuadable, some people are just not persuadable, right? And to some degree, you need to be speaking to them, but the ones you're really trying to persuade are the people who are persuadable, but are at this point leaning the other direction from where you want them to be. And you want to move them back to your side of the yes/no line, right? So the people who are way out there who are like, I will never believe anything from this side, right? Then there's a limit to what you can do. I'm not expecting you to convince them, and probably you shouldn't be expecting yourself to convince them today. Some of those people who are on the fence. So if they're on the fence and just leaning a little away from you, you might be able to pull them to your side. If you don't attend to their side of the argument appropriately, you're going to lose them like a fish off the line, right? You need to attend to their side of the argument. You need to point out the things that are strong on their side of the argument, as well as the things that aren't, right? But if you just ignore the good ideas that are on the other side, those people who are just on the other side, they're going to dismiss you. Oh, you are too partisan. You can't even see the good reasons, and they will harden in their arguments. They will harden in their position against you. You want to entice them over. Come and see my side. It's better than the other. The other's good. It's just not as good, is a way to think about it. So part of what happens is that if there are arguments for the other side, you can inoculate them kind of like a virus, where rather than ignoring the virus and just letting people catch it and live or die, you can inoculate them. So you attend to the virus, you say, oh, there's this thing, and we're going to put something in the body that will cause it to fall apart. So you want to take those opposing arguments and attend to them, that you want to acknowledge them, and you attend to them by pointing out where the weakness is. Right? The weakness is there is no actual factual evidence underneath this. I was talking about that with the concerns that are out there about voter fraud. There is no evidence of actual voter fraud. Is it a problem? Theoretically, could it be a problem? It could be. Is there a problem right now? There is zero evidence. So it's not that voter fraud doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen enough to sway any elections that we can find any evidence for. That's the point of evidence, right? So that's the way you could get in there and you undermine this other argument. Maybe not as I've just done. I'm sure you could all do it more gently and softly than I am. But you need to attend to that other argument, find a way to deconstruct it. And then that's going to make that other argument weaken. Maybe not completely fall apart, but just weaken enough that you can pull those people to your side. You don't need to give the opposition equal time. So when you're crafting your speech and you're going to say, there's this solution and then there's this other solution, whatever solution you want us to adopt, feel free to spend more time. That's okay. That is still ethical. Just know that it's not like it's got to be 50-50 like some debate. You are the person who is making the appeal. You will control this. So somewhere between 0 and 50% is what you want to give to the other side, right? You don't want to give the other side 0%, but you don't need to give them 50% either. How much? Depends on your speech, depends on how strong the opposition is, depending on your audience, all those things. There's no magic formula here. But just know that you don't have to give 50%. Be like Fox News. So don't offer unbiased information and leave the audience decision up to the audience. You need to persuade them that your position is better. You're not just sort of completely even-handed about this. Fox News is intentionally biased. They are intentionally biased in order to oppose what they see as the liberal bias in the rest of the media. So it's okay in your persuasive speech, you're supposed to be having an opinion. Okay, so that's fine. Be that way. Be that way. Okay, some methods for presenting your evidence. So the book talks about 4 different methods for presenting evidence, And I'm not going to talk about all of them. I just want you to use method 3, okay? And this is what it is. So when you're presenting evidence, you're going to make your claim, this is true. The next thing you're going to talk about is your backing, why you believe that, what is the evidence that's there for that, and the source, which is generally your warrant, where you got it from, and then qualifications of that source. Okay, assertion, evidence, your source, and the qualifications of that source. Okay. So you'll find that again in the book if I'm moving too fast here for you. Assertion, this is the thing I want you to believe is true. This is why I think it's true, where I got it from and how it connects the evidence to the claim, and why that source is authoritative. Okay. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some fallacious reasons, some fallacies, some untruths, some lies. And there's a whole bunch of these, and many of them have Latin names, which means you have to learn a little bit of Latin, but it's not that hard. The first one, and the book talks about a whole bunch of them. There are scads of them out there. And if you're really interested in this kind of rhetoric and argumentation, you should take rhetoric and argumentation classes where you will learn a lot about these. But these are some of the most basic you're going to see out there. And the ad hominem, which means at the person, right? Homonym is, the root of homonym is homo, meaning human, meaning man. So at the person. So the gist of the ad hominem fallacious reasoning is that person is bad, so they must be wrong. Of course, just because you don't like a person or there's things about them that are distasteful or who knows what, doesn't mean their ideas are wrong. Their ideas might be right, even if they're an awful person, okay? So you really have to attend to the ideas. Now, some cases, some people are so agreed upon that as being awful, like Hitler, that you're best off not actually leaning on Hitler for your side. That would be a bad audience analysis. You know, was Hitler wrong about everything? No, but you just don't want to go there. Anyway, generally though, I'm going to move on. Okay, so here's an ad hominem example, of course. So this is another short video here talking about how ad hominem works.
Welcome to Argument Clinic, a guide to spotting bad arguments on the internet. In this episode, we're going to be talking about ad hominem, a classic logical fallacy. What's that? You don't think ad hominem attacks are that bad? Well, you would think that because you're a moron. I'm kidding, of course. You're not a moron. I'm just demonstrating an ad hominem attack, which means trying to refute an argument by attacking the character of the person making it, rather than the logic or premise of the argument itself. Boy, okay, now, where can we find examples of an ad hominem attack?
It's Rubio!
Sure, there must be one around here somewhere.
He said he's got pathological disease. He actually said pathological temper, and then he defined it as disease.
Come on. One of you must have seen somebody respond to a critique by reflexively attacking the character of the person raising it, rather than the substance of the argument.
He has a news conference all the time when he's eating. I have never seen a human being eat in such a disgusting fashion.
Okay, to be fair, it is not just President Trump who resorts to ad hominem attacks. Anytime someone dismisses a protester by saying they're paid by George Soros, or argues that anyone who supports Trump's immigration policy is racist, they're using an ad hominem attack. Take a look at any comment section and you'll find tons of ad hominem attacks. Ad hominem attacks are not always wrong. Sometimes the character of the person making an argument is in fact directly related to that argument. If, for instance, they're making an argument based on their own authority and they don't have any. If my buddy Daniel tells me that he learned in med school that it's totally healthy to eat 7 pounds of beef stroganoff a day, it would be perfectly valid for me to point out that he never actually went to medical school and is in fact an electrician. But for the most part, people make ad hominem attacks to avoid the argument altogether. Let's take a look at a few different flavors, shall we? So you've got ad hominem tu quoque. This is when you accuse someone of not practicing what they preach. For instance, when a carnivore tells you that eating meat is bad for the planet, the fact that this purely hypothetical meat eater can't resist a savory bowl of beef stroganoff does not invalidate the argument. And then there's ad hominem circumstantial, in which you try to invalidate the argument by claiming it is within the arguer's self-interest. For instance, if I present data that proves that tax cuts are good for the economy, it would be a fallacy to dismiss it just because I'd benefit from that tax cut. And then there's poisoning the well, in which someone is primed to distrust someone else's argument in advance. For instance, the way Donald Trump called a bunch of press outlets enemies of the American people the day before news broke about some members of his administration's communications with Russia. You get the idea. Ad hominem attacks are easy, and they can be kind of fun, but they are not sound. They are dodges, a way to avoid grappling with the substance of an argument itself. You don't agree? Feel free to hop on the next train to Losertown, because that's obviously where you belong.
Okay. So, ad hominem, and I think we all know, having seen even this last election, right? President Trump was a master of ad hominem attacks, but I want to note it doesn't just come in that one guise, as that speaker noted, right? There are lots of ways that ad hominem attacks are used against all kinds of people and all kinds of reasons, right? Bad idea. Okay. Second one is ad populum, which is to the people, right? The populace. This notion of 1 million people marched on Washington, da 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 da. Therefore, the reason they marched is the right reason. But just because a bunch of people believe something doesn't mean it's true, right? This goes back to what your mother said. If just because everybody went and jumped off a bridge doesn't mean you would too. So this is an argument that people make for why something is real or true. Is look how many people agreed with this or believe this, doesn't make it true. Okay, another one, ad ignorantium. That would be to the you don't know, right? Ignorance. The notion is here, the example is, you can't prove aliens don't exist. The problem is that this goes into where the burden of proof is. The person who asserts the claim, aliens exist, they're the one who needs to prove that it's true. It's not your job to prove it's not true. So when somebody advances this argument, look for that. Who has the burden of proof? And if it's not on you, and you got, no, it's not on me, dude, you got to prove it. Okay, false dilemma is one you're going to see a fair amount. And it kind of goes this way, where you're presented with two choices, and they tell you you have to choose A or B, and they present it as your only two choices, when in fact there are other choices out there. So watch for this one. Anytime somebody says, well, you got to choose A or B, part of your spidey sense should go, really? Isn't there a choice C or D? Maybe the whole choosing thing is broken. We don't even have to make a choice. So here's an example. So that either this person was truly abducted by aliens or she's crazy, right? Somebody says they were abducted by aliens and you're like, well, either she was abducted by aliens or she's crazy. And she's not crazy, so she must have been abducted by aliens. Somebody presents this to you and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to follow that. But this is a false dilemma, right? There are other options. Why else might a person claim that they were abducted by aliens? Well, maybe you're making a joke. They're telling a story. They're trying to be impressive. They're, who knows? They had a dream. They were drugged. As soon as you start breaking out of the false dilemma, you can find lots of other options. Okay. Begging the question. Okay, here I've got another short video for begging the question. 2 minutes.
You may have heard people criticize an argument by saying that it begs the question. But what does that mean and why is it bad? Let me begin by saying what it doesn't mean. It's not just a trendy way of saying raises the question, although a lot of people misuse the phrase that way. So they'll say things like, the governor says she's going to fix our roads. This begs the question of where the money's going to come from. No, that's not what that means.
You know, John, this begs the question of what your next video will be about.
No, that's not what that means. When we say that an argument begs the question, we mean that it assumes as a premise that which it needs to prove as a conclusion, or more simply, that it's circular. To beg the question here is just to evade the question. Suppose, for example, that we're arguing about whether everything in the Bible is true. And I say, well, here in Paul's letter to Timothy, it says that everything in the Bible is God-inspired, so it must be true. See what I did there? I assumed the truth of the Bible in order to argue for the truth of the Bible. In that sense, I evaded the question at issue. Here's another example. Suppose you say that we need to reduce immigration in order to protect national security. And I say, why? And you say, because we have to do everything we can to protect national security. Okay, but whether reducing immigration is one of those things is the very question at hand. If you just assume that without providing evidence for it, you're begging the question. You're assuming what needs to be proven. So if you want your arguments to make any kind of progress, make sure that you're actually providing evidence for your conclusions and not just asserting them in different terms. I'm John Corvino, and this is Better Argument.
Okay, so begging the question. I thought he did a really nice job of explaining how that circular reasoning works. Okay, so hasty generalization basically is when a conclusion is brought on without any evidence. That you've got too small of a sample in order to really extrapolate to a larger group, right? That's the whole point of a generalization, right? Is you have examples and samples, and you say, well, this must be true of the whole population. So I have a little scene here that I wrote that might help to provide an example here. A conversation between two guys, Bill and Joe. Bill says, you know, those feminists all hate men. I was in my philosophy class the other day and that Rachel chick gave a presentation. Which Rachel? The one that runs the feminist group over at the Women's Center. She said, all men are sexist pigs. I asked her why she believed this, and she said her last few boyfriends were real sexist pigs. Well, that doesn't sound like a good reason to believe that all guys are pigs. She said that she had seen enough of men to know we are all pigs. She obviously hates all men. So do you think all feminists are like her? Sure, all feminists hate men. So this is my little example here. And I find myself clever with this because there's multiple hasty generalizations here, right? Bill is making the hasty generalization that all feminists hate men. The woman, Rachel, this fictitious Rachel that doesn't ever get to speak for herself in my misogynistic play here, but she also is a victim of hasty generalization, right? She had a couple lousy boyfriends and then she has extrapolated that to all men. So this is the example, right? Are a few bad apples true then of everyone? That's hasty generalization. So there are some bad apples out there in any case, but is that the reason why we should do such and such? Okay, so watch out for that. Is there an actual sample going on? Okay. Fallacious reasoning number 6, post hoc. So talking about this, right? This goes back to causation does not, correlation does not mean causation. This was caused by that, okay? So as I've said before, two things happen but are not linked. So my next example comes from the TV show The West Wing, which is a political show by Aaron Sorkin, sort of chum in the water for liberals. Okay.
Americans need to buy more American cars.
Which is what I told Jaworski.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
What do you got?
443 is going to stay in committee.
I heard.
What else?
The Ryder Cup team is declining our invitation to come to the White House
You're kidding.
because of the joke.
You're kidding.
I'm not.
The Ryder Cup team.
It's a group of the best golfers in the country.
I know what the Ryder Cup team is. Thanks, Mrs. Lanningham.
Sir, this may be a good time to talk about your sense of humor.
I've got an intelligence briefing A security briefing and a 90-minute budget meeting all scheduled for the same 45 minutes. You sure this is a good time to talk about my sense of humor?
No.
Me neither.
What else?
It's just that it's not the first time it's happened.
I know.
Talking about Texas, sir?
I know.
USA Today asks you why you don't spend more time campaigning in Texas, and you say it's because you don't look good in funny hats.
It was big hats.
What difference does it make?
It makes a difference.
The point is we got whomped in Texas.
We got whomped in Texas twice.
We got whomped in the primary, and we got whomped in November.
I think I was there.
And it was avoidable, sir.
CJ, on your tombstone, it's going to read post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Okay, but none of my visitors are going to be able to understand my tombstone.
27 lawyers in the room. Anybody know post hoc ergo propter hoc? Josh?
Post, after hoc, ergo, therefore, after hoc, therefore, something else hoc.
Thank you. Next.
Well, if I got more credit on the 443 thing.
Leo.
After it, therefore, because of it.
After it, therefore, because of it. It means one thing follows the other, therefore it was caused by the other. But it's not always true. In fact, it's hardly ever true. We did not lose Texas because of the hat joke. Do you know when we lost Texas?
When you learn to speak Latin?
Go figure.
What else?
Captain Tolliver, can I get you a cup?
All right. If you know that TV show, as I do, I enjoyed that TV show a lot. It was fun to revisit it. So the notion is, right, just because one thing follows another doesn't mean that it was caused by the thing, right? President Bartlett in this fictitious White House didn't lose Texas because of a hat joke. One thing followed the other, but it wasn't that, right? It wasn't the hat joke that made this liberal Democrat lose Texas. It was the fact that he was a liberal Democrat and Texas leans Republican, right? So post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's a post hoc fallacy. Okay, slippery slope is another one we see with great frequency in the political sphere. The notion is one step is going to lead to another, is going to lead to another, and that's going to lead to disaster, right? It's the slippery slope argument. We hear this often on Second Amendment things, right? Any kind of restriction on gun ownership is going to lead to more restrictions on gun ownership, which is going to lead to a communist takeover of the country. And it's a slippery slope argument, is that there is actually no evidence that small incremental changes will lead to this big disastrous outcome. So, right? Disaster is not necessarily inevitable. Sometimes one step is just one step, and you can put a pin in it, and you're not going to take another step, right? There's this fictitious slippery slope, right? If you take a step and you're just going to be sliding into this disastrous end. But sometimes that's not the case. So watch out for the people who are arguing that if you take this one small reasonable step, it's going to lead to this highly unreasonable outcome. You really have to be able to poke at that. All righty. Looks like I got another little video. Today is the day of videos. Oh, okay, so this is about showing some slippery slope arguments here. And looks like in this case, it's about marijuana legalization.
Okay, Stephen Baldwin, hi. You're against legalizing marijuana. Why?
Well, it's a little bit ironic. I could see why Jimmy wanted to rush out of there so quickly. Here you're looking at an actor that has starred in two very popular marijuana films, Half-Baked and Biodome. And, you know, here I am bringing a faith-based conservative perspective to this issue. And, you know, obviously, Joy, there's a lot of common sense that needs to be included in this conversation. It's a very simple reality. Marijuana leads to doing worse things. That's just a fact. I don't care what anybody says, what the debate is. When you smoke marijuana at a young age, it'll usually lead to alcohol abuse and harder drugs. So right there, I mean, that's one reason why it should not be legalized.
We've heard that for years, that it's a gateway drug. What do you say to that, Congressman Paul?
Well, I think that's silly. Probably the most addicted drug in the country, in the world, is nicotine. And nobody talks about nicotine being a gateway drug. So there's no sense to that. And besides, it's not nearly as addictive as alcohol. So if you're a consistent person and you think the government should be regulating personal behavior, you have to be for prohibition of alcohol. And when you look back and throughout history and what happened to that, that was a total disaster. It created the Al Capones. And right now today, there is so much violence today, not because people use drugs, but because they're illegal. That's why, you know, the people who benefit the most by all these laws, these are the drug cartels. They lobby to keep these laws in place because they can't exist without them. You don't have the Al Capones now because you don't have prohibition of alcohol. Prohibition is what is bad. And this does not mean we endorse personal behavior that is not beneficial. It just means who regulates personal behavior. And it shouldn't be the state. There's no benefits.
Okay. I guess that's my last slide. Isn't that a glorious thing? I'm going to stop the sharing here and just talk for a couple minutes. We got about 5 minutes left. So I just wanted on that last example, Stephen Baldwin, one of the things that should make your spidey sense just go off is anytime somebody uses the phrase, it's just common sense. And so watch for this, because almost always in my experience, this is shorthand for I don't have evidence. I don't have evidence for the thing I'm presenting, but I don't need it because it's common sense. So watch out, because you do need it. The problem with common sense is that common sense is so often wrong. Common sense tells you the earth is flat. Common sense tells you the sun goes across the sky. There's all kinds of ways in which common sense, oh, well, it just makes sense, but it's not backed up by science. That's why we have science, is because common sense fails us. So when somebody is trotting out an argument that says, well, this is just common sense, that should be a huge red flag for you. That, in fact, there generally is not only a lack of evidence, there's generally evidence on the other side that they are wanting you to ignore. So in this case with the slippery slope, the notion is it a gateway drug, right? Does recreational use of marijuana lead people to heroin or other things that are much more disastrous? And as Senator Ron Paul, Republican of Texas, notes, there's no evidence for that. And so, you know, that's part of what you need to be looking for is that where's the evidence? Okay, so that was an outline of some of the basic fallacies that are out there. My notion for you is hopefully this will help you have your spidey sense tingle, right? And you just kind of go, wait a second, I need to look at this further. I need to think about this more. That's, you know, your ability to be able to get presented with one of these fallacies and immediately be able to refute it doesn't really happen. This is what sometimes people call a stairway moment, is that you've left a party and there's been some kind of an argument. And then later when you're on your stairway, you're like, this is what I should have said. I could have said this and this and this and pow, pow, pow. I would have nailed all their arguments. Most of us in real time, we can't do that. So let yourself off the hook, but it's something you're going to put a pin in and you're going to come back to and think about rather than just accepting the argument that's presented. When you're reading this stuff, you're going to have a much better ability to be able to unpack it, right? You can stop and say, wait a second, and think about it and all that stuff. That's part of the advantage of print. When you hear it in a speech, when you hear it done live or verbally, it's harder and takes more practice. So I don't expect anybody to become accomplished in that in this class. But I do expect you, as you are writing your own speeches and crafting them, that you're going to avoid these unethical things. So really be thinking about the arguments you're presenting, that they are ethical and they're not full of fallacies. If you have to win your argument by including unethical practices or fallacies, you're on the wrong side of the argument, my friend. You have to switch teams and think about it again, right? Which is okay. It's okay. This is part of what you're supposed to be doing. Thinking, changing, right? Opening yourself up. And sometimes what you're going to do is you're going to come in and you've got something that you think is true, and you're going to open it up and you're going to look at it much closer, and you're going to come out of it going, wow, it really was. I was right. I'm not changing, but my knowledge and understanding is deeper. That's the other outcome that should hopefully happen, right? Just be ready to change. Be ready to change when you encounter other ideas. That's a sign of strength. Okay. For next class, I want to do sort of a quick poll here. Ooh, maybe we can do that in the chat. My question is, for the next couple of classes, what I've got set up in the syllabus and in my head is that at the end of my last time I taught this class in December, I sat down and I sketched out what are the problems that I see? What are students still not getting at? And that's what those couple of next classes are about, is I want to just sort of and do a little module teaching to some of these things like project management that aren't really part of this class, but I think it's really, well, maybe it is part of the group part of this class, right? What are the tools for actual project management that I can offer you in a class period? My question is, do we want to split the class up? Is it okay to meet on Zoom for the next couple classes and do this? Do you want to come in? Are you aching to see some people and we should do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing? And I try to do stuff both with people in class and on Zoom. I'm seeing Frederick shaking his head no. So how about if do you want to, you can either unmute or in the chat, or I don't know, maybe I take a poll. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw up a poll here. Ooh, can I do this? Add a question. I've never done this. I don't think we have time for me to figure out this poll function. Forget it. So I've got a couple of you who are showing me. Does anybody want to speak for the other side? Frederick has suggested that we should, it's okay to just meet on Zoom. Anybody really want to do something else? Andrew? See, you're unmuted.
I think you should like leave it open. If anybody wants to come to class, they can come, and those who want to be on Zoom, to be on Zoom. But because of to be fair, like the number of people who are supposed to be in the room, they're not supposed to be like more than 9. Maybe if you want to go to class, you should let you know in advance.
That's a great idea. If somebody wants to come to class, email me. And when I get 9 people confirming that they're going to be in class, I will send out a message on the Moodle site saying we're cut off, right? We can't have any more people. Great, Frederick.
I like the idea of having everybody only on Zoom because in class, it's just really, really hard to pay attention when you're far, far away and you're talking to like in-person people. So here it's like you're looking right at the camera and super engaged the whole time, which is why I like it so much better.
Okay, Ashley, I saw you unmuted. No? Okay.
I just wanted to suggest something. I don't know if it would work, but our political science professor does this. So he did a poll for people who want to be in person or online. And then he split the class into 2. Yeah, so you could also do that. But I get that it can be hard, but yeah, so I'm so sure you can just do a poll. I'm sure there are people who want things.
That's a good idea. I'll put together a poll and send it out to the class and see what the responses are. Anybody else want to chime in? I know that we're past time and I want to honor your time. But if there's anybody else who has, I noticed Carter, you turned your camera back on. Didn't know if you had also something to say. Okay, great. I'm going to send out a poll. Expect that later this afternoon, and you can let me know how you want to proceed, and then I'll kind of figure it out from there. Thank you for those suggestions, class. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Enjoy the weather, and I will see you one way or another on Friday.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.